Today we're going to look at the matter of voicing and things related to it. And we had an introduction to this yesterday with a lecture by Dr. Huckvale when we were seeing something of the effects of the function of the larynx and the vocal folds. So obviously today I don't want to duplicate any part of that, simply to draw your attention to the diagram, diagram 1 on the first page, which simply gives us a couple of presentations of the larynx and the vocal, the organs, the voice cords, the vocal folds. We have the glottis, as you can see in the diagram B, and the vocal folds, and they are the things which are going to interest us because we are concerned not with their anatomy, but with their what they actually sound like. So we're going to be dealing with this from the auditory point of view. There are some handouts. Good. Now let's turn to the page 1, which is the beginning of today's session proper, and consider the first paragraph there. As you know, what we call voice is actually a whole mass of different possibilities if we take it in sort of scientific detail. But if we consider it from the human functional point of view, then we're really only going to be concerned with whether we can perceive something, some regular buzzing kind of noise, or whether we can't. We're not going to be concerned in the functional speech aspect of things with the physics. Therefore, we have to operate in the auditory mode. Our judgments have got to be made on the basis of our ears. And we can consider practicing this if we, for example, try to turn the sound s, s, and we convert that into a voiced sound by adding some buzzing effect. So like this. Okay? Now, you all ought to be able to do that. Right? So let's try and see if you can. Okay? So, let's see if you can do that. And then turn it into a Z. Okay, now let's do it the other way around. Start with a Z and turn it into an S. Right, join it. Okay, so that's the kind of thing which human beings can control very readily, and that's the sort of thing which we have to do when we're dealing with any language in which the contrast of voicing is important. So indeed in English that is so. So sounds then, speech sounds which have voice or voicing are described as being voiced, and those which lack voicing are described as voiceless. So we have the s kind of sound as a voiceless sound, and therefore the other one z with a buzzing from down here in the glottis. This is the one which is voiced. In English, in particular, there is the requirement to give attention to the third possibility. Now this is not true in many languages. So in many of the world's languages, once you establish that some sounds are voiced and some voiceless, then that's all you need to know. Now English is not like that, because we have a third category, which is called de-voiced. And that's in paragraph 2. And I said that this is something which is of the greatest importance to the correct understanding of English phonetics. In other words, you can't pronounce English correctly unless you are aware of the distinction between voiceless and D-voice. We'll come to that in a little more detail later. First of all, let's consider those sounds which are traditionally voiced. Well, the paragraph 3 introduces the sentence, slightly modified, Mary had a young lamb. Mary had a young lamb. Okay? And in that sentence, every sound is voiced, so we would be able to perceive the buzzing noise if we were able to investigate our glottis, for example. We would be able to perceive the buzzing noise from the beginning to the end. Now, if we put the word change not young, little, which is what it normally is, then Mary had a little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, then we discover that the T in little is actually without voicing. So this is a major discovery then, going along with S and Z. S is voiceless, T also is voiceless. So some sounds then are fairly clearly establishable as voiceless. They have a clear category assignment which doesn't cause any problems. And S and Z are those. Now, some sounds, therefore, are going to be characterized by the absence of voicing, and they will be the first ones of the pair. Each pair, if you look at in paragraph 3, you can see a list of symbols, the first of which, in each case of each pair, is voiceless, and the second of which is customarily voiced or described as voiced. So we would then be able to say that there is a category of sounds in English which are expected to be voiceless, and indeed pretty well always are voiceless. If we notice, incidentally, just in passing, that the vowels are expected to be voiced. Under most circumstances, that's going to be true for English. Similarly, we expect all the remaining consonants to be voiced. We expect L to be voiced, of course, because it's one of the remaining consonants. We also expect, some kind of problem with H, which is a variable sound and something which we're going to have to give little special attention to on another occasion. Let's move down now to paragraph 4, bottom of page 1, where we are talking then about the fact that the presence of a T before an L can cause the L to lose some of its voicing. So we expect L to be voiced. But if the T comes immediately before the L, okay, then the way that we release the T causes a delay in the voicing in the L. Okay? So that is something that we would refer to as a situation of de-voicing. So the L here then is de-voiced. Now whether it loses all of its voicing or whether it loses only some of it is something which the term de-voiced doesn't cover. So if we want to be precise, we would have to specify by some other terminology, or by the little diagram which we'll see over the page, in terms of how much de-voicing there is, or putting it the other way around, how much voicing is left, if any. Okay, so we have then the situation where the English consonants and those which we expect to be voiced can be produced without all of their voicing or without some. I said that the English voiced consonants precariously voiced. And this, I mean that in English, the so-called voiced consonants do tend to lose their voicing very easily. And again, this is not something which is characteristic of the languages of the world, where we have, as I've said before, 3 categories in English and not the normal 2. Now, if we continue to the second page, at the top here we can perceive that the voiced members, all the voiced members, I've said, of the paired consonants can be devoiced. And this is that they can be devoiced if they occur next to a voiceless interval. Now, by voiceless interval, of course, one of the things I mean is silence. In other words, if it's at the beginning or the end of the utterance, then that constitutes a situation where devoicing can occur. If we have a voiceless consonant next to a voiced consonant when we're talking about the paired consonants, then again the voicing can disappear very readily. Okay, so this accounts for the fact that in English we don't have voicing at the very beginning of the sound, for example, the B in bad. So if I said it like this, bad, bad, okay, bad. If I start voicing from here, immediately I close my lips. Bad, bad, bad. Okay? Now, this is true for many of the languages of the world, and it accounts for one of the regular mistakes made by speakers of languages of this kind, where if they have an S before a sound like B, a voiced sound, if they have a voiceless sound, then they modify the voiceless sound to anticipate the voicing of B. So they say not this boy, which they should in English, but this boy, this boy. Okay? Now this is a characteristic of a very large number of languages. It's rather odd, or perhaps it's just I don't know enough, but it seems to me, in my relative ignorance, rather odd that some languages have this, others don't. So English and Turkish share the characteristic of not having early voicing. Russian, Arabic, Hungarian, Spanish share the characteristic of having early voicing. Now, if you've got early voicing in a sound like B, then you have the tendency in that language to anticipate the voicing when you join 2 words together, because it makes life easier in the connected speech sense if you can have the same voicing. Okay, so in other words, if you can begin the voicing in an S, if it comes in this boy, then that makes life easier. So that this boy has only one operation for voicing, or you turn voicing at the beginning of the utterance, this boy, and you keep it going all the way through till you get to the end. Now, that is very nice and easy, but unfortunately it's wrong, because we don't say this boy. There's only a few dialects of English which are very clearly marked in their regional associations, which will have this kind of pronunciation. And for RP and every related accent of RP, General American, and so on and so forth, all of these have what we would call late voicing. And this means that there is no voicing perceivable to anticipate at the beginning of the word boy. Okay? because I don't start voicing when I close my lips. I don't do this, boy. I do it like this, boy, boy, boy. And that's a B to me. Now, in many languages, it would be a P, or it would be a lot closer to your P in many languages than it is to the English ear as a B. But that is the way that we define B in English. And therefore, we don't have this change of voicing. Now, once again, if you don't know that your language has early voicing, then you won't know that you're doing things like this boy and so on. And that is going to be a mistake which you could correct if you knew it were there. But if you don't know it's there, then of course you can't do anything about it. So that's what practical classes are about, and I expect part of the practical work in the succeeding weeks will be to eradicate the early voicing in segments like B, D, and G, and so on. Okay, so looking then at these sounds, I'm looking at the example here where we have the word bad. You can see, excuse me, this is surrounded by the voiceless sound, or by voicelessness. In other words, it's no utterance before it, no utterance after it, and therefore we have devoicing. And I've used the diacritic underneath to show the little circle, which I hope is clear on the handout, to show that that is a devoiced segment. So we would use that diacritic under any situation where the voicing that we expect to be there isn't, either, as I've said, fully or partially. Now, as you can see, both B's here are voiced a little bit. The first one at the end, and the second one, or the D rather, at the end of the word is voiced at the beginning. This is not necessarily always the case. We remember, though, that the D-voiced category means that the D-voiced D, as in bad, never makes the word sound like that. Okay? So, however complete the D-voicing of the D might be in bad, it's never going to sound, the word is never going to sound like the word that, because that is one of the ways in which we make the distinction. Now, another way in which foreign speakers can make a distinction is to say bad for the first one and bat for the second one, which makes them very clearly different, but unfortunately different in a way that no native speaker would ever do. So if you say bad because you know that the D has got to be made different from T, then that's going to be wrong because nobody says it. Okay, let's look now at the next section. I'm sure you'll get plenty of practice on this in your back-up classes. Looking at the next section, and if we compare the voicing of the initial B in the paragraph 5 with the voicing characteristics of P plus the same vowel in paragraph 6, where we have the word had, then here, logically, the delay of voicing of P has got to match that of B. So if we have late voicing of B, then we've got to have even later voicing of P. That's logical. If we didn't have later voicing, then they will both sound the same. And obviously, the language can't go around having all its words sounding the same, otherwise nobody would know what anybody is talking about, and chaos would result. And of course, we try to avoid chaos, at least in the phonetic and phonological sense. We're not so good at avoiding it in other senses, perhaps, but at least phonetically and phonologically, we do our best. So we delay the voicing then of P. Now, obviously, there is no more consonant left, and so the devoicing effect of P has to be carried over into the following vowel. So what we've actually got here in the first example in paragraph 6 is a devoiced vowel. And I've just shown the devoicing of the vowel as being very slight there in the straight line at the bottom, as opposed to the wiggly line, which is meant to indicate voicing. The conventional terminology for this is aspiration, and we don't actually refer to the vowel as being devoiced following P, T, and K. We refer to the P, T, and K as being aspirated. But it is exactly the same thing. So well, the fact that we've got two different terms, one for the P and one for the D, is really somewhat misleading, because it's precisely the same phenomenon. We're merely delaying by a fraction the onset of voice. It's a parallel operation and totally the same. So adopting the conventional terminology then, we would represent P in the word hand, as you can see in the example there, the middle of page 6, paragraph 6, sorry, where the P is shown as aspirated, and little h at the top means that that represents the delay of voicing. Now, in fact, the H is used because the H, excuse me, the H is actually a sort of anticipation of the following vowel. And as we'll discover in a later lecture, the H is modelled on what vowel follows it, and therefore the H is an appropriate abbreviation. What we could have done would be to show the beginning of the vowel as devoiced. We might have written a little a symbol, vowel symbol, after the P in the place where the H is, and then a devoicing diacritic under the vowel. That would have served the same end. Now that would be a nuisance, because we'd have to do a different vowel for each vowel occurrence. Whereas if we use the H symbol, then this means that we can reasonably take the H to subsume, to include under it headed all of the instances of devoiced vowels in this kind of context. So if we have the word play, then we would devoice the L, and we would show that in the square bracket notation with a devoicing diacritic for the L. If we take the word pay, then we show the P as being aspirated with the H. But it is exactly the same thing. Now we note that the aspiration of P is paralleled by the aspiration of T and K. And so P, T, and K are considered in English to be the same kind of sound. And these sounds are characterized by aspiration. Now, it is often said that P, T, K are aspirated in English, and therefore we hear many foreign speakers producing aspiration for every single P, T, K which occurs, and that makes a rather odd effect, because obviously we don't have we don't have aspiration in every instance. So if we look at the observation in paragraph 6, where we note that aspiration is especially strong at the beginning of a stressed syllable. Okay? We come down to the concept of syllable in moments. But first of all, let's just observe that we have this being the case in a stressed syllable. So, obviously, if I take the word export, report, then P there is in a stressed syllable, and that's going to be aspirated fairly strongly. Whereas if I take the word deepen, then P is at the beginning of a syllable which is not stressed, and that is therefore not going to be such strong aspiration. And it's true to say that the more distant the repeatee to do it and to recognize it as and when it occurs. So we would look at the analysis of the S plus the P, and obviously one of the things we could say is that the P and the aspirated P and unaspirated P are in such a position here that the difference between them gives us the difference in meaning between the words. Okay? So in other words, we could argue for including aspirated P and unaspirated P in the list of phonemes, in other words, the list of vital contrastive units of English, because we've got a difference here based on aspiration. Now, there are languages in which that is the case. English, for the present, doesn't require this analysis because, for one thing, we always have the alternative pronunciation with a vowel. So somebody who says support on one occasion will say support with a vowel. That's one reason for not doing it. And the other one is a matter of principle in general, that we don't add units to the basic list of units unless we are forced to do so. It's one of the principles of phonetics and linguistics that we retain the smallest number of units. We've rather departed from it in respect of some of the vowel segments that we have now in our system, but as far as the consonants are concerned, we don't feel the need for the present to add to them, although there are ways in which we might easily feel that we want to modify them. We don't want to modify the list with respect to the aspiration and lack of aspiration of PTK, because we have a perfectly feasible solution, as you can see here, which is to show that between voiceless sounds, the vowel, the vowel schwa, which we'll come to tomorrow, don't worry about the name if I've crossed it before, the vowel has what we could call a D-voiced realization, or a D-voiced allophone. Okay, so fairly predictably, if this vowel occurs in any situation where the sounds are voiceless on both sides, then we could produce a voiceless allophone. And not only there, but quite often we have even things like where there is only one voiceless sound, as in police. Police. Lots of people don't produce voice in here for the vowel and say please, please. And we have a thing called a colloquium, the phonetics colloquium, and this is often pronounced by phoneticians too, or especially colloquium. A colloquium. So we reduce the number of syllables, we genuinely remove the vowel under those circumstances. Here we don't remove the vowel because there is the retained, we have the retention. I'll make that a bit clear. If we say police, right, and that's meant to be the word police. Now, what actually happens is that we have devoicing at the end. Please, please, please. Now, in that case, we have generally interpret removal of the vowel. Because not only have we taken the vowel away auditory, we have also carried out the effect of devoicing from the P to the F. Okay? So to us now, there is no longer any vowel at all. Right? There's no trace of the vowel, so therefore we can say the vowel has been elided or left out or whatever, because there is a full phonological and phonetic adjustment to the absence of the vowel. Now, if we take support, we have on the analysis, which is in paragraph 6, gives us a different situation because however quickly we say it, we always retain the aspiration of P. So the two words sport and sport are never identical. Whereas the consonants at the beginning of the word please, consonants at the beginning of the word please with D voice L are, for many people, exactly the same as the consonants at the beginning of the word please, where we've taken away the vowel. Okay, so I hope you appreciate then that there is a difference here in phonetic terms between the removal of the vowel, meaning there is no trace of it, and the removal of it in one respect, but not in every respect. Now, just looking in the last 30 seconds at paragraph 7, and I don't want to go into this in any great detail, but because we've already dealt with the matter of syllable division in this time, for example, but looking at words like 16 and 15, we discover that the stress on second syllable is usually best marked before the S. If we take the sort of morphological setup of the word, obviously it is 6 and then T. So the T of teen ought to be aspirated because it's at the beginning of the stressed syllable. So it ought to be 16. 16. But in fact we don't say it, or most people don't. So we would expect to get, although dictionaries, pronouncing dictionaries often tell you that that's what you ought to be saying, but experience in modern pronunciation rather indicates that it is more likely to be without aspiration, therefore we put the syllable division after the K and before the S. So by the syllable division, we're showing that the S belongs with the T. Now in English, if we say the S belongs with the T at the beginning of the stressed syllable, then the implications are that the T cannot be aspirated. Okay? We can't just say these belong together and then leave it at that, because that wouldn't be saying, giving the whole picture. So we have to say that the implications of this are that the S and T produce the T as unaspirated. Now, if we look at the word 15, I've given the pronunciation 15, 15, and this is an unaspirated T. And this again is very, very common in English pronunciation. So not 15, 15, which I find to be rather an odd pronunciation, speaking subjectively, because I would never use it, I don't think, and this is the only way in which I could pronounce the word. So 15, so that the F and the T belonging the same syllable. So it's not just the effects of S, which remove the aspiration of PTK, it is also the F. And there may, in this particular word, and there may well be other words where that kind of process takes place. Obviously, it's not really possible to go through all the words in which it could happen, but it is something that you, as a general principle, need to be aware of, and then, having become aware of it, you can then take it into the practical situation. Because obviously, my final sentence is that practical phonetics is in the real world and not in the phonetics classroom or the phonetics lecture room. It is out in the communication situation with ordinary people who don't know anything about phonetics. That's where it's all got to work. That's where we get our information. That's where we have to take our practice back.